In 2007, Kenya opened its embassy in Seoul, South Korea, in a bid to deepen trade as well as bilateral ties between the two countries. 15 years down the line, we look at relations between Kenya and South Korea. Joining us on this week's edition of Inside Government is Ambassador Mwende Mwinzi. She's the one in charge of the Kenya Embassy in South Korea, and she's joining us so that we can have this conversation. Thank you very much indeed, Balozi, for joining us here.
Thank you, Kimani.
You've been in office less than 2 years. I mean, you came at a time when COVID-19 pandemic, was ravaging the global economy, and Asia was one of the worst affected continents. So have you managed to settle down, and how is the situation in South Korea now?
The situation in South Korea is actually quite good. As you are aware, South Korea was one of the countries that managed to contain the COVID pandemic quite effectively. I must there add a caveat that at the onset of COVID in April of 2021, we too, as a government, were recognized for our success. And when I reported, which was in November of 2020, the restrictions were at their peak. And that was an advantage to us as a country, at least in terms of our operations in Korea, because it gave me an opportunity to delve into the files and spend a lot of quality time with my colleagues at the mission, trying to understand what we were going to prioritize as follow-ups once the restrictions opened up. So it gave me a lot of time to really strategize, and then when the restrictions eased, hit the ground running.
After settling down, what would you say was your first assignment in South Korea?
There were many things that I did simultaneously. There are things that you need physical presence, and there are things that you didn't. So all of the paperwork that was, just piling up, I was able to clear because, there's a lot you can do electronically. I mean, we live in a digital world. And that's, in fact, the beauty of technology. And I think COVID underscored how effective we can be without the physical interaction. But as an example, one of the things that we focused on, which then we did, was the Coffee Expo, the Seoul Coffee Expo, which Kenya was privileged enough to be a host country. And once the restrictions eased, we had our first delegation into Korea. It was led by our Cabinet Secretary for Trade and Industrialization, Betty Maina, along with quite a few other senior delegates, including from the coffee reform, Professor Kea and his group, and from the directorate. And it was a very successful event, which has then yielded the results that we are really beginning to see. I think you may be aware that Korea is the first country in Kenya's history that has offered an opportunity where there has been a direct transaction between a coffee farmer and an importer, without Kip Kellyan, without the intermediaries and the marketers. Today I came from Moranga, where we met all the cooperatives there, and we went to the mills. And yesterday we were in Machakos. We have that particular importer in Kenya at the moment, and he's going to be going across the country because we want to empower as many Kenyan coffee farmers as possible. None of this would have been able to happen were it not for the efforts that were undertaken before the expo and the subsequent follow-ups after.
You see, the reason why Kenya opted to open an embassy in Seoul, South Korea back in 2007, it was to try and even, the trade imbalance that still exists, between the two countries. And when you look at the situation, it actually has not improved because, the imbalance is heavily skewed towards South Korea, whereby exports or imports from South Korea now stands at about $250 million US. But when you look at how much we're exporting to South Korea, it's less than $30 million US. How come we have not managed to tip the balance to our favor?
I hear this question all the time, and I think the answer is a very simple answer. We are an agricultural country. There is no amount of bananas or broccoli or avocado or coffee for that matter that we are going to export, value added or not, into Korea that is going to equal in any measure the value-added goods, and you're well aware that they're, a technology country, that are going to equal the TVs and the medical equipment, all the other technology that they, and the mobile phones, which all of us, I don't really know of too many people that don't carry a Samsung or have some Samsung electronic device in their house. So that will never be able to balance out. But that does not mean, Kimani, that we should not work very hard to figure out a way that perhaps helps us. My view is instead of looking at pumping into an environment where the restrictions are very tight, they always will be tight. What we can export is also very limited because they have FTAs that favor other countries when it comes to agriculture produce. What we need to do is we need to attract their FDI in sectors such as manufacture, such as health, where we are very well aligned. And in the process, we will not only spur our economic development, but we'll also create jobs in the process. So really, I think the focus should not be on trade imbalance. It should be how do we strengthen the relationship, the bilateral relationship with Korea in a manner that is more favorable to Kenya. But I thank you for asking that question. If by extension I may say this, people need to realize that the relationship between Africa and Korea is indicative of Kenya's relationship with Korea. And it's important to note that the skewing of trade, every country is complaining about that. But look really in tangible terms at how much Korea is trading with Africa. It trades about less than $1 billion with the entire continent of Africa.
About 100 billion Kenya shillings.
Yes, now compare that, if you will, with China, which of course China is a much larger country. It's at about $20.8 billion. But look at Japan. No, billion in terms of just the trading with Africa. But Japan's trade with Africa stands at 14 billion. So here is Korea at 1 billion, and here is Japan at 14.
And then you have China
at
about 20 billion.
And then you've got China at about 20 billion. Let's look at investments. Korea invests about $3 billion in Africa. Now, the first one, by the way, was about 1%. 1% of all its trade globally with Africa. Now, look at compare it to the rest of the continent, the rest of the continents. In terms of investment, you've got the $3 billion that it invests in Africa. You've got Japan, juxtaposed against Japan, which is about 25.6. Now, that's Japan, small country next door. And that represents about 0.07% of its global investments. So there is a concern from the entire African region as to how deep its relationship with Korea as a country is. And we as a country, we share those concerns.
I mean, of course, this has always been a challenge when you look at the level of foreign direct investment into Africa from South Korea. I mean, it has always been a concern. But as Kenya's #1 citizen in South Korea, do you believe there are deliberate efforts that can be made to try and narrow this gap?
O'Brien, it's not future efforts that are going to be made. We as a mission have been very aggressive in our assertion that something has got to change. Our relationship with Korea has got to be more satisfying. It's got to yield deeper, tangible results, because we're spending a lot of money deploying staff to the Republic of Korea. We also are very supportive of our relationship with Korea.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is we need to do a lot more, and we need to sit at the table and figure out what it is that they can do that meets our requirements. And I go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is converging in manufacture, converging in health. As a matter of fact, Korea's priority right now is biohealth. And we just had Moderna, a US company, invest $500 million in Africa's only mRNA vaccine facility. We've got all the other vaccine or pharmaceutical companies, whether it's Pfizer or the rest that are based here. Koreans need to recognize that as they're grappling with the costs of labor elsewhere, Kenya right now is on an upward trajectory. The enabling environment for trade and investment is thriving, and this really is the place for them to consider as their base for, not just tech transfer, but actual investment in manufacture. Mm-hmm. So these are conversations that we're actively having.
In 2018, when their Prime Minister, Lee Nak-yong, visited Kenya, there were various agreements that were signed, and one of them was to deepen IT collaboration between the two countries, the setting up of special economic zones, and especially more on light manufacturing or industrial zones. Have we yet seen any of those agreements being actualized?
I can proudly say yes, we have. Konza Technopolis, which is going to be a smart city that is essentially replicating and learning from the best practices of Korea's smart cities, is one of them. There are going to be at least 3 projects that are going to be funded and that are being funded by the Republic of Korea through Exim Bank. One of them is a digital city, which is going to focus on content development, is going to exploit the fact that we have such a vibrant tech ecosystem that really, we're not called the Silicon Savannah for no reason, and it exploits that. So we're going to have film, it's going to have a research component, like I said, content, and that's just one of it. And then there's talk about a smart vaccine facility. That's not totally concluded. But beyond that, and going back to the digital and the technology part, there's going to be the first ever Advanced Institutes of Science and Technology outside of Korea. KAIST. Only in this case, of course, the K is Kenya and not Korea. And it's an interesting story of KAIST, because KAIST is really the backbone of why Korea is where it is. It was conceived by a gentleman who was going to MIT in the US, and it was his brainchild. And most of the people who started all these big companies, the Samsungs and everybody, they're alumni of KAIST. And to this date, a significant portion, close to 30% of all the researchers are also KAIST alumni. The Kenya KAIST is deliberately going to start quite small. They want to ensure that the faculty and the student body is of the caliber of the original KAIST. And then they're slowly going to grow it and welcome all the top, students from across the continent, and they're going to attract faculty from across the world that is also of that caliber. Just so that you know, the plan is to make sure that KAIST, similar to the Korean KAIST, is protected in law, so that it doesn't end up being I come from a little subboard called Chambo. It doesn't end up being the Chambo School of Technology. Mm-hmm. So by keeping its integrity in terms of the standards, it has to be, enshrined in law. And I was actually in KAIST last week. I accompanied all of my fellow envoys because we were here for an ambassadorial conference, and we got an opportunity to walk around and see and feel what Konza is going to be. And I look forward to it attracting. And phase 1, by the way, is virtually sold out in terms of investment. Yeah. So it is virtually, not even just in terms of the infrastructure, but in terms of the subscriptions. You've got tons of investors that are already coming in and claiming blocks. So it's attracting a lot of attention, not just across the continent, but internationally. And by the time we are done with Konza Technopolis, all it will do is it will strengthen our positioning as not just the Silicon Savannah, but also as an investment destination.
You talked about the exports from Kenya to South Korea, which is largely, coffee and a little bit of tea. But when you look at what we can do, is that all that we can do? I mean, bearing in mind that Kenya is a global player in the horticulture industry, especially in the flower industry, in the production of nuts. What more can we do to capture the Korean market?
There's a lot we can do, and we're pushing. One of the challenges that we have had as a country, and we are really being aggressive in our conversations with Korea, is both the technical and non-technical barriers to trade, which have to shift. We understand every country's need to protect, the integrity of its ecosystem. But some of the restrictions, say the sanitary and phytosanitary restrictions, are really, really unnecessarily stringent. You cannot tell me that, for instance, our avocados are good enough to export to China, which we're about to start. Japan is looking at our avocados. We're exporting tons and tons and tons to the UK. I believe we're going to be, if not already, exporting to India. So you cannot tell me that our avocados... Yes, you cannot tell me that our avocados are not good enough to export to Korea. We are very close to begin that because we have gone back and forth on the particular pests that they've identified. We should be concluding that very shortly. That will open up a whole new market. I know that there are some very big chains in Korea that are already queuing for our avocados. But even without focusing on fresh produce, and you mentioned flowers, the issue here is really the flights. It's how we sell our flowers. They do import Kenyan flowers, but they import them they procure them at the auction in the Netherlands. In between now and then, now and where we want to go, I've said that we need to be creative. There are things that actually don't need to go through those processes, like processed items. Korea is one of the largest, actually it's the largest consumer of sesame.
Sesame seeds.
Sesame seeds. They make a lot of sesame oil. We can export sesame oil. We don't have to go through the SPS process, but we can export. We're trying to identify interested parties. By the way, we can export the avocado oil. Right now, unfortunately for us, we are so popular. Our avocado oil as a country is so popular that we are struggling to meet the global demand. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was talking to somebody last week because I had an interested party, and they said they're a Kenyan. They're shutting down their production to get new machines so that they can come in and start pressing at a much higher volume.
You're talking about exporting flowers, and we do export our flowers to India. We do export our flowers to Japan. Why is it so hard to export our flowers to South Korea, which is just next door?
It may be next door, but I think you need to appreciate the logistical complications. We do not have, unfortunately, a direct flight into Korea. There used to be, as you may recall, a direct flight on Korean Air, which was suspended. We're hoping, that's correct, we're hoping to revive either the Korean Air flights or generate enough traffic, whether it is cargo or passenger traffic, such that this is a viable opportunity for KQ. We have also been exploring perhaps an arrangement between other airlines, such as Nigeria's largest private airline, which is Air Peace, liaising with KQ, and then working either with Asiana or Korean Air, so that you've got between the volume coming in from Nigeria in terms of passenger, because we're a transit hub, as you know, and then picking up Kenyans and cargo and liaising with one of them to get into Korea. So these are ongoing conversations. I have every confidence that once we make the process of travel the logistical process less of a, less arduous. You will see more tourists, you will see more conference engagements. Right now, depending on when you board a flight, you might get stuck in Dubai for 22 hours, a 22-hour layover.
I've been a victim of that. So I know there has been conversations between the government of Kenya and the government of South Korea in terms of having Kenya Airways flying to Seoul. Have we made any headways into that?
Again, what we're trying to do is make it a viable, prospect. Because if we don't have enough tourists going back and forth, or we don't have enough cargo, then it's not financially feasible. Particularly given the financial situation that KQ finds itself in. But this is a conversation that, like I said, is ongoing. And I believe if we partner with other airlines, such as we did with South African Air, for instance, then it splits the burden and it makes it a win-win for all.
And, in terms of having conversations between Korean Air and Asiana, have they shown any indication of coming to Kenya through Nairobi?
Koreans are actually opening up their eyes. They are being a lot more receptive. I think it is very, very, very clear to them that if they do not follow through on what they've engaged in terms of cultural diplomacy, where everybody now knows about K-pop, K-beauty, K-drama, if they don't start improving on those trade and investment statistics that I mentioned earlier, then they are going to lose out because the global dynamics are completely changing. And Korea needs to enhance its global footprint. Part of that is, of course, opening up the skies so that there's a lot more collaboration and their network globally is enhanced. So yes, they're a lot more receptive. I honestly think it's just a matter of time.
And in terms of collaborating with their heavy industries, like the Hyundais of this world, the LGs, the Samsungs of this world, are there indications that they are willing to set their manufacturing bases for Africa here in Kenya?
We're trying to push. We're seeing an enhanced appetite. I must say they are, as a people, quite risk averse. They are very, very careful in the investments. But today alone, I got an inquiry. Last week, I got another inquiry. And there's a lot more traffic, but largely focused on infrastructure, which we need and which we're encouraging. In terms of manufacture, there's a little less that we're seeing in terms of inquiries, but they are they're slowly, the frequency is definitely we're seeing an upward trajectory. When
you talk about infrastructure, I know they have been heavily involved in Kenya's energy sector and more so with the geothermal exploration here in Kenya. Are there plans to expand that, probably, maybe to wind, to solar, to hydro?
Our Minister for Energy, CS Ambassador Juma, was recently in Korea for that particular conversation. She met various entities, including Ketraco, and there's an ongoing discussion. In fact, there should be a team from Kenya going to learn, a collaborative engagement between the two, just trying to learn what is it, what can we do, and also learn from Korea's mistakes. There were discussions on wind. There were discussions of, as you mentioned, geothermal. I think it was Hyundai that did Okaria. But when it comes to infrastructure, a lot of what they're focusing on is not so much energy per se, but they're interested in roads, they're interested in rail, they're interested in, as an extension of the Konza Smart City, exploiting the environment that's going to create, especially as we move into solidifying the free continental trade agreement.
Mm-hmm. I also know they have been tremendously involved in Kenya's nuclear ambitions, where they are undertaking the training of nuclear engineers, and of course helping Kenya upscale its capacity. How more are they planning to do, or are they willing to do, to help Kenya achieve a nuclear energy status?
We have an agreement. In fact, we have an MOU that is on nuclear. You're correct that they have trained quite a few in their King's Institute. I recently attended a graduation virtually because we had the restrictions of, I believe, 4 Kenyans. So they offer quite a few Kenyans scholarships. This is a space that needs to be expanded. I was very impressed that one of the top nuclear lecturers, professors, wants to physically relocate himself to Kenya to work at the University of Nairobi, to work in the nuclear department there, to help build the capacity of even, the lecturers. So whether it's at a personal level or at a governmental level, because it's off of a state entity, there is a broadening conversation. I mean, this man is actually going to move to Kenya to enhance our nuclear knowledge.
As we wind up our engagement this afternoon, I want to hear from you. Where do you plan to take Kenya-Korea relations to?
I think there's only one direction to take it in, and it's upwards. Kenya's foreign policy right now is courageous, it is bold, it is engaging, and we are looking to see, as I said earlier, very tangible results emanating from our relationship within even the course of this year. Our counterparts, my counterparts on the Korean side, are willing to sit down. They're listening to our complaints. They're taking our concerns very seriously because, as you mentioned, our embassy, for instance, has been open for 15 years. And we need to validate, we need to justify its cost and our existence to the people of the Republic of Kenya, the taxpayers. And Koreans are paying attention to it. We expect those avocados to be cleared. We expect a pharmaceutical company or two to establish a footprint. We expect to see more K-beauty in Kenya that will create employment, that will enhance the beauty of our Kenyan men and women. And we do expect to see a lot more companies investing in infrastructure that will also help spur our economic development through enhanced infrastructure.
Good. Anything else?
No, just to thank you for inviting me to this show and to thank the people of Kenya for giving me the opportunity to serve them in Korea.
Asante sana and all the best.
Kamsahamnida.
Kamsahamnida. Well, we've been talking to the Kenyan ambassador to South Korea, Ambassador Mwende Mwinzi, joining us on this week's episode of Inside Government to help us understand how we can deepen trade ties with South Korea. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Kamsahamnida.